Hello, good evening, and welcome to our class and podcast, Functional Solutions. I'm Tal, the Educational Director at the American Academy of Functional Health, and with us we have Dr. Esha.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to be with everyone tonight.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Esha. And
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're hoping that you're having a good evening wherever you are. We're here in the Northwest. It's sunnier and warmer than usual. How's it over there, Dr. Esha?
I'm here in the Midwest, and it is really hot and sunny here. So I think that you guys are getting some of our heat because it's a little cooler today, but it's still hot. So
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll take it. The rain season will start here very soon, so I'll take as much vitamin D as I can get. Right?
Yes, I love it. Yes.
So tonight we have a really interesting topic that we're going to talk about. This is something that we have talked about previously in the GI Summit and in the Advanced Functional and Nutritional Medicine program. And that is the topic of the gut and skin axis. So a part of our class today is really going to really be dedicated to understanding the mechanisms that could contribute or lead to the development of eczema. So tonight's class is called Eczema from the Inside Out. And we know that in the conventional approach, of course, there's a different methods or different way of seeing and addressing chronic diseases, right? So, for example, what we're seeing is more and more eczema patients that are going to see their dermatologist, and they continue to struggle with those symptoms of eczema. So if you're looking for uncovering the root causes of those conditions, chronic conditions, and gain new knowledge and skills, you are in the right place. So in today's class, we're going to dive deeper into the major contributing factors that are not discussed in the primary care or the conventional approach that can continuously trigger this inflammatory condition. We're also going to look at some really cool studies, interesting articles that were published, and take a science-based approach to helping those patients who are struggling with eczema. So in the United States, the first reason we picked this topic for today is in the United States, we're seeing more and more patients present with eczema. And the conventional dermatology approach is to use topicals, steroids, and that, of course, is really all focused on management of the condition, right? But in the functional approach, we are taking a completely different point of view, right? So, Dr. Esha, tell us a little bit of your experience with patients that had skin conditions, eczema, those types of inflammatory flare-ups.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of atopic dermatitis, eczema cases, and with, like you mentioned, the functional medicine approach, where you just kind of always dig a little deeper. I always find that there are specific culprits, and patients can always, once they do the digging, figure out what triggers are worsening or even causing them to have flare-ups and such. So I do think that the functional medicine approach to atopic dermatitis, eczema, I think it's just top tier in my mind, and how it's able to really, truly help patients with their disease state, but also like empowering them to feel like they actually have control over their health. So I do a lot of integrative dietary components. We'll talk about supplements, I know, but there's plenty of like really nice protocols out there, and it's not extensive or excessive, but just simple things you can do to support your patients with eczema. So I'm really excited to dig into this one, because I feel like it's a topic that you don't really hear discussed so often in functional medicine, but it's a really bit chronic uh, skin issue. I think it's the most common chronic inflammatory skin issue. So I'm excited to chat about it.
Yes, absolutely. And beyond being such a common condition, the second reason why we chose to talk about eczema is because we've seen so many patients that continue to struggle.
Yeah.
We know that with the mainstream approach of just trying to manage the condition or reduce the inflammatory presentation, right, by using topicals and
Right.
steroids and all of those, we're not really addressing the underlying root causes, right? And so this is where it's important to look. You mentioned the dietary factors, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's so important.
Very.
And it's so interesting to mention that from just my own previous kind of professional experience, talking previously to dermatologists or sending patients out to dermatologists, none of them have talked about dietary factors.
Right.
Right? It's really interesting to go through that experience. And then beyond that, none of them actually talk about what's causing it, right? It's a very, it's a very much needed approach to manage the condition so they don't get worse or continue to develop more complications.
Right.
But we also know that if we don't address the underlying conditions, the patient continue to struggle, right? So this is why it's so important. So this is, we wanted to share with you first an image for the Allergy and Asthma Network, which kind of gives us an overview of statistics of eczema across the United States. So we can see that there's about 16.5 million adults, US adults, who are struggling with eczema. There's 9.6 million children, and it's more common in females, and 90% of those report daily itching. Over 50% of those patients report interference with daily life, right? And the burden is pretty significant, right? There's over 50% of children that have severe atopic dermatitis, and they develop asthma as well, right? And we know that the financial burden, is over $5.3 billion a year, right? Now, of course, if you're sitting there and you got inflammation of the skin and you're itchy all day, that can, many of those patients also have reported anxiety. We're talking about 30% of those patients reported anxiety, depression, and sleep problem. And those are big numbers. Those are a lot of Americans who continue to struggle. So in the general point of view, eczema, as we all know it, is a chronic inflammatory skin condition that is presented as redness, itching, pain, soreness, bleeding, cracks in the skin, blisters, oozing, and issues with sleeping, right? So this is quite a chronic. Those patients suffer on an ongoing basis, and of course, there's moisturizers and topical steroids, and the focus really with the conventional approach is how can we suppress the function of the immune system, right? Today, we're going to take a different approach. We are going to ask ourselves, what are the major factors that contribute to eczema, right? So next time you're seeing a patient with this type of a skin condition, you can start to identify maybe the signs and symptoms, maybe order the appropriate lab testing, functional medicine lab testing, and go beyond the prescription of medication to help them really create a treatment plan that will serve them in a long term, right? So, Dr. Esch, I'm really excited about today. And I know the first factor is factors that we talked so many times about before, but we're going to take a completely different perspective and talk about eczema from the point of view of this factor.
Yes. I think that gut, obviously I'm obsessed with gut health, but anytime there's a patient with any kind of chronic inflammatory issue, skin or whatever the system is, you have to look at the gut always. There's so much literature around how the gut is sometimes a huge trigger and also something that contributes to the progression of a disease. Even if it's not the trigger, it can just contribute to the progression. So I think gut is always the king when it comes to evaluating chronic issues. So research suggests, like we mentioned, the gut microbiome plays a significant role in the development of eczema by shaping the immune system early in life. So when the gut microbiome becomes imbalanced, which is dysbiosis, what we call dysbiosis, it disrupts immune regulation, promotes downstream inflammatory cycles, and can just kind of set the stage for chronic inflammatory conditions like eczema. Studies have found that people who have eczema tend to have higher levels of certain bacteria, so the Clostridia, the Clostridium difficile, E. coli, and even the Staph aureus microbe in their gut. And then on the other side of that coin, they tend to have like less of the protective microbes. So the bifidobacteria and the Bacteroides are often reduced in this cohort. So the imbalance can alter the production of metabolites. I think we've talked about the gut microbiome and metabolites that can come from these microbes and just them existing in the gut. Just having the imbalance in your microbiome contributes to further downstream effects. So it can alter your metabolite production in the gut. It can alter short-chain fatty acid production, your butyrate, which is really important for a healthy gut microbiome, just healthy cells in the gut. They can also, these short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, acetate, propionate, can just be really great for creating an anti-inflammatory effect in the system, supporting a healthier gut barrier. And then, interestingly enough, when you look at some of the literature, they find that in infants with milder eczema or no eczema at all, they tend to have, they're more likely to have the butyrate-producing bacteria compared to, let's say, infants with more severe disease. So that butyrate component kind of comes back into play as a protective mechanism in the gut. So the gut microbiome, it has axes with multiple different systems, your skin, your liver, your lungs, all the things. But as it relates to the skin, it actually impacts the skin both directly and indirectly. So certain gut bacteria make compounds that can actually affect how the skin feels and functions, which I think is so cool. So, for example, tryptophan, which is produced in the gut, can actually trigger itching symptoms in the skin, while beneficial strains like your lactobacillus, your bifidobacterium can create GABA, which is kind of a calming, which helps calm itching. It's also something we think of also for like calming anxiety, like a GABA type of effect. So really interesting that the microbes in the gut can produce these things that can then impact the system. So other microbes, your Neisseria, Enterococcus, they can produce serotonin, which can also play a role in skin health. So beyond just these like direct effects, the microbiome also impacts your skin through your stress response, right? So stress hormones like cortisol can disrupt your gut barrier. It can shift the balance of microbes living there. And in turn, this can change the signaling molecules that are happening throughout the system, such as your tryptamine, trimethylamine, serotonin. These are ones that circulate throughout the bloodstream. These molecules, obviously, we know they affect brain function, but they also influence our skin barrier and inflammation in the skin. And a huge facet of atopic dermatitis or eczema is disruptions in the skin barrier. So definitely something to think about from a gut health perspective. So we're going to take a look at an image that kind of details it out in a little bit of a more nuanced way. So in this image, we see certain mechanisms of how the gut microbiome regulates the pathogenesis of atopic dermatitis. So the short-chain fatty acids are the very bottom row, the very first little rectangle or box there. Short-chain fatty acids produced by the gut microbiome are able to activate short-chain fatty acid sensing G protein coupled receptors and then inhibit the deacetylases, so the histone deacetylases, which then can activate downstream signaling cascades that suppress inflammatory responses and restoring the T helper 1, T helper 2 balance. So a lot of times in chronic illness and in autoimmunity, you see this kind of theme around, or it's more of a dance, I would say, around the T helper 1, T helper 2 balance and what kind of components can increase it versus decreasing for calibrating the immune response. So the short chain fatty acids, downstream effects impact the Th1, T helper 2 balance. Microbial metabolites, the D-tryptophan, which I think is down there in the third box, can also impact that T helper 1, T helper 2 balance. Bifidobacteria, which is a genus of bacteria, which many different good strains of microbes, probiotics belong. They are an important source of these metabolites. So microbial tryptophan metabolites can activate certain receptors, the aryl hydrocarbon receptor, which inhibits inflammatory responses and improves the epidermal barrier of the skin. So that's just kind of the bifidobacteria genus. And then the last little thing I'll mention are these, they call them PAMPs and DAMPs, but the PAMPs specifically, which is the very, very right, there's not a box around it. It just says PAMPs. But they're pathogen-associated molecular patterns produced by the gut microbiome. They can activate these toll-like receptors that can also impact your Th1, Th2 immune balance. So this is just a specific snapshot of how the gut in many different ways actually impacts our immune balance, which can then further impact our inflammatory and skin inflammatory barrier and function. So we'll jump to a pop quiz to kind of test our knowledge. Which of the following bacteria are found in higher amounts in people with eczema compared to healthy individuals? A, bifidobacteria and Bacteroides. B, Clostridia, Clostridium difficile, E. coli, Staph aureus. C, Lactobacillus and bifido. Or D, Coprococcus eutactus. What a mouthful. Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds. And if you chose B, you are correct. Higher amounts of certain bacteria, Clostridia, C, Clostridium difficile, E. coli, and Staph are found in higher amounts in people with eczema. So this is just a little snapshot, right? If you're interested in learning more about the gut-skin axis, along with just functional integrative ways to support your patient's skin health or gut health or eczema, you can always look into your advanced and clinical functional medicine platform and check out the modules there. You can also book a coaching call with us. As you know, those are part of your program and are of no extra cost to you, and they can help you, offer functional medicine right away to your patient. So, Dr. Tall, what do you think about that gut skin connection? Pretty gnarly, huh? All the ways the gut impacts our skin.
Yes, absolutely. It's a fascinating topic, and it's one that we really dive in fairly quickly, I think, in the advanced functional medicine program. For that reason, we're right after going into functional immunology and how everything around us in our environment, our food, our water, our air, like everything, our dietary choices, micronutrients that we eat, macronutrients that we eat more or less, how does that impact and shift our immune function, which is really important for every provider to know. The next step is really getting into the gut health, right? Because it's so important, and you mentioned, and there's something that I'll add to it. When you understand the gut microbiome, then you really start to look at these patterns of which bacteria are associated with each disease or each condition or each clinical presentation. And that is so useful in clinical practice, because I'll never forget that when I got the results of the first few GI stool analysis with some chronic patients, and that gave me so many answers to why they're sick, why did they develop their symptoms, or what contributed to their symptoms, right? And of course, it's not always a clear, it's not always as clear and straightforward. But interestingly, it always falls on gut microbiome integrity, function of metabolism. Are they breaking down their food properly or not? Right. We're looking at short chain fatty acids. We're looking at the secretion of different enzymes, right? We're looking at the pH. We're looking at all these different factors. Is there inflammation? Is there too much zonulin? Is there too much? What's going on there, right? And it's a whole ecosystem that, the way I see it, right, if I could draw it, it's kind of like there's this gut ecosystem with trillions of, not just, we talk mostly about bacteria, right? But in the in-depth training, we talk about the impact of the other organism in our gut, like for example, the candida or other stuff that are naturally found in most of us. And it's the ecosystem that kind of pulls the strings, and those strings might be connected, almost like a puppet. Like it's connected, like one string is connected to our brain, one string is another string is connected to our joint, another one to our endocrine, our immune system. So they're pulling the strings all the time.
Right.
The question is, what are they doing, right? Are they pushing us toward better health or more dysfunction, right?
Right.
So that's a good question to ask. So thank you so much for doing that overview. And of course, for all of you in our program, you are invited to connect with Dr. Esha and Dr. Chill and Dr. Kim, another one of our mentors. And so you're welcome to connect with experienced healthcare practitioners with years of clinical experience. Do case studies with them. That's really how we get you there faster in order to apply functional medicine from your first and second month in the program. So now that we covered the gut, we talked about the gut, let's talk about factor number 2. And this is the immune reaction to foods. So this is a massive topic, and we actually have a whole training, probably about 3 hours, just on the different types of immune reaction, which I'll mention a few of them with our time together this evening. But when we talk about eczema and we look at all the different studies, immune reactions to food are fairly common and can affect many aspects of our health. For individuals with atopic dermatitis, diet very often play a noticeable role, and there are many studies that are showing that there is improvements when we remove certain foods from their diet. So, for example, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis study that was published in 2022, and they found that nearly half of the patients, it was about 48% of patients with atopic dermatitis, had some form of reaction to food. Now, when we say food reactivity, it's not always food allergy. Sometimes it could be referred to as food sensitivity. And there's a big difference between food sensitivity and food allergy. Food sensitivity could have a delayed or a very mild or moderate response, while food allergy has a more stronger and very commonly more faster reaction, right? So it's easier for patients in general, again, to understand what they're allergic to, because let's say I eat something and then I develop the allergy within minutes of eating that certain food, right? With sensitivity, it's harder to identify those, right? Because those are delayed response. Now, the data, when we look at overall data of atopic dermatitis and food reactivity, there are some conflicting results. However, we're going to look at results of one particular study, and this is a cross-sectional study that surveyed 169 eczema patients, and they found a few very specific correlations between certain foods and the development of their symptoms. So the image we're sharing with you right now is from the journal Dermatology Treatment. And you can see here the most common allergen or triggers, let's call them triggers, right, are dairy, that was number 1 reported. Second to it, gluten, alcohol, sugar, tomato, and citrus, right? And then eggs as well. Now, alcohol and sugar, obviously, those are both inflammatory. And then dairy and gluten could have different mechanisms specifically. Now, interestingly, right, we know that both dairy and gluten contain certain proteins that our body can react to. We know when it comes to dairy, if you study in-depth nutritional medicine, you also know that as we age beyond infancy stage of our lives, we lose the enzymes that allow us to break down milk and dairy products, right? So most adults actually are lacking that enzyme. We don't have a sufficient amount of those enzymes as much as we used to have when we were in our early stages of our lives, right? When we mostly fed mostly fed milk, right? Either formula or fed by the mother. And so there's could be potentially issue that is not necessarily allergy with dairy, which is the inability to properly break down milk and dairy products. And then gluten is a little bit more complex, right? So this is really interesting because when we talk about gluten, we know that there's of course the allergic response to gluten. So for an example, a clear inflammatory reaction such as celiac disease, right? But we also have the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is a fairly new topic in medicine, and there's a lot of new research that is coming out in the last couple of decades. And essentially, non-celiac gluten sensitivity is where individuals experience intestinal and or extraintestinal symptoms that are triggered by gluten ingestion. Now, of course, this is, again, not wheat allergy and it's not celiac, right? Because unlike celiac, non-celiac gluten sensitivity does not cause an autoimmune damage to the intestinal lining, right? And unlike wheat allergy, it does not involve IgE-mediated allergic reaction. So why is that important to know? Because if you got patients that report either bloating, abdominal pain, changes in their bowel movements, or maybe they have fatigue, maybe they have dermatological symptoms like eczema, skin-related rashes, right? And you test them for food allergy, such as an IgE testing, it might not come up, right? You might look at it and say, well, the allergy test shows that you're not allergic to gluten. They keep eating gluten and they keep getting this inflammatory reaction, right? And this is because gluten is a very complex food. It contains multiple types of protein, for example, gliadins and glutenins, right? So there's different types of proteins that are stored. They're classic storage proteins in wheat. And again, the immune activation in gluten sensitivity is not autoimmune, right? It may still provoke innate immune responses, right? That's one mechanism. And second mechanism, it could increase the likelihood of intestinal permeability. There's actually studies that clearly show it, that when those participants consume gluten, they have a secretion of zonulin, which opens up their tight junctions, right? So this is something that is really important to talk about. So I wanted to mention it just in case you're seeing those patients and you're kind of you scratching your head. You're like, I don't understand what's causing it, right? So food is very, very important. And in my practice, when we used to see these patients with these types of autoimmune conditions, the first thing we do is sit down and explain to them that it is possible that they have a reaction to those foods. Now, of course, there are specific testing that we can do to identify those sensitivities. There's probably 2 or 3 different types of testing, and we want to pick the best one for our patients. However, what the most affordable thing to do that we can recommend without going the testing route is to ask them for the next 3 months to find alternatives to dairy products, milk, gluten, and sugar. Those are the 3 things that I would always ask our patients. And my pro tip to you is to call it for your patients the 90-day challenge, right? And we call it a challenge because we know it's not easy to replace sugar. It's not easy to replace dairy if somebody is living on a lot of dairy products. Like I was raised on a lot of dairy products, right? And I was eating a lot of gluten, right? So it's called a challenge. Thankfully, there are really good alternatives today, even in lots of restaurants for people that eat out. There's lots of alternatives today they can find that do not contain dairy, gluten, or sugar, right? They need to be aware of it. And of course, you as the person, the go-to person that will show them how to improve their health and function, you're the one that is going to lead and guide them towards this understanding, so they can stop continuously triggering an immune reaction that is presented in their skin, right? That damages their skin. So I'm going to finish with another interesting report. This comes from a Korean National Health and Nutritional Examination Survey, and they looked at all different types of foods that patients with eczema were eating. And what they found is that people who ate processed food had about 1.5 times higher risk of atopic dermatitis, right? So, for example, one of those processed foods were individuals who were eating instant noodles, right? So the instant noodles that you mix with hot water, and it's got all sorts of added chemicals to it, right? So those had like flavoring additives and preservatives and all of that. They had a significantly higher, about 150% higher risk of developing eczema. On the other hand, those who ate more traditional foods like rice and kimchi had a significantly lower risk of eczema, right? So with that knowledge now, let's do a little pop quiz and see what you have learned. So in the cross-sectional study of 169 eczema patients, which foods were most commonly reported to be triggers? Option number 1, dairy, gluten, alcohol, sugar, certain vegetables. B, rice, kimchi, and seaweed. C, meat, fish, and poultry. D, coffee and tea. So this one is pretty straightforward. If you've been paying attention to what we were, this information we were sharing with you, it should be pretty straightforward. I'll give you a few seconds. And the answer is number A. So as I mentioned, and as you saw in the picture from the published study, dairy, gluten, alcohol, sugar are the first things you want to inform your patients that they should attempt to remove from their diet and substitute with something else, right? We always talk about, in the nutritional medicine side of functional medicine, we always talk about what's the more simple alternatives that they're not going to feel as much as they're missing something, right? And so that's really important. Now, I would recommend a 3 months sort of elimination or 3 months challenge, and that to help your patients again to eliminate. Now, if they want to go down the route of like testing and figure out are there other proteins in other foods that can trigger that reaction, there are options to do that, right? And we talk more about that in the advanced functional and nutritional medicine program. So, Dr. Esha, I know it's a big topic, and we can probably spend 3 days now just talking about nutritional medicine for autoimmune conditions, right?
Yeah. For skin conditions, I think the elimination diet is so, like, I don't know what the word is. It's like so overlooked. It's so priceless for supporting a patient at really minimal cost to them. Well, I won't say minimal cost, but essentially eliminating products. So just kind of finding healthier, more just plant-based or just kind of healthy, clean-based ways to eat, and just eliminating a lot of processed stuff. I can't even tell you how many patients I've seen with eczema or hidradenitis or puritativa just do elimination diets, no other supplements, and have significant improvement in their condition. So I'm so happy that you mentioned that one. And I do agree, like a 90-day, a 3-month elimination diet is always kind of the best place to go. And then starting with those larger food groups that you mentioned. But I think an elimination diet is just kind of, a really excellent place to start with patients who have chronic issues. And when you were talking about the instant noodles, I thought about a patient that I saw with eczema since they were little, and we went through their diet. And like a few times a week, they're having instant noodles just because it's, convenient, they're busy. And I just thought, wow, just simple correlations with one food group, or one food item to eczema is powerful, just to have that information and educate patients with. So I know you and I don't eat those foods. I don't, maybe. You don't eat any instant noodles, do you?
No, so I don't, I don't actually do gluten. We don't do gluten in our house. We try not to do sugar almost completely. So
Nice.
we'll use alternatives to sugar whenever we can. And then same thing with dairy. I mean, we'll use a little bit here and there, just as more flavoring.
Right.
But less. It's not going to be our main dish.
Right.
Right.
So yeah, exactly. So the functional crowd, I feel like we're really cognizant about these things, so we don't use them, but our patients, that's their normal lifestyle, right? So we have to just think about these things. I would never think, oh, instant noodles, because it's just not something I think about, right? So when you see these studies and you mention that, I think, oh, wow, I did have that case where they were specifically eating that a few times a week. And I didn't think to specifically correlate it because there were other things happening, but just elimination diet will eliminate all of that, right? And so, yeah, that was great information.
Yes, absolutely. And, we talk a lot about functional medicine because that's obviously why we're all here, and everybody's listening to us right now. They want to learn more about the root cause because they're seeing the same patients come back with the same symptoms, keep them struggling. But like what you just said resonated with me so much, and it kind of reminded me the conversation I had with Suzanne. She's a nurse in one of our programs. She's a nurse practitioner in one of our programs. She graduated, and I did a check-in with her just recently. It was it was like a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her, "How are you doing? How's everything?" She's been doing both our functional medicine and our practice building both together, and she was also getting some coaching and mentorship, and she built her practice fairly quick. Like she graduated a few months ago. I don't think she even graduated. I think she's in the process. Like she's close to being graduating.
Okay.
But we kind of coach her through how to get started right away, right? Like here's the fundamental of functional nutritional medicine. Here's a mentor to go work with. Now get started, right? And we'll show you how to build your practice. And her testimonial video, our conversation, is gonna be out probably this weekend for everybody to she wanted to share her experience. But one of the things that really was like, it was kind of resonated what you just said and reminded me of the conversation is, she's already in full-time private practice. So she used to just do primary care, just prescription, like 100% of the time. And she said, I didn't feel like I was really helping my patients on a deeper level, right? I didn't feel like I was making a big difference in those people's lives. So she left. She started a practice, private practice at home. So she does a lot of virtual, and she's at full time. She's getting paid very well. I mean, $300 per appointment. And she's fully booked. We now helped her, like through coaching. She hired another health coach to help her.
Nice.
But it was something that she said, and I asked her, so what do you feel most valuable for those patients? And she said, number one is nobody ever told them why they're sick, right? And she said the second thing was really powerful. She said, the foundation of everything that I do with them from like day one is talk to them about their nutrition.
Yeah.
And she said, when I use this combination of the root cause with a strong nutritional foundation, she's like, patients are getting so much better. She's like, it's like a complete day difference between day and night. Like they come back a month or two later and they tell me, oh, this symptom is gone. This is better, more. And so it's like, we talk about nutrition and it's so important, right?
It's
It,
very important.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
It can really make, in my opinion, it can really make the difference sometimes between a successful treatment and a
Yep.
not so successful treatment.
100% agree. I mean, you see patients who just kind of do supplement protocols, no dietary work, and they just kind of are stuck, or they never increase in their relief. So I agree. I think the diet is king. It's baseline for starting out.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to talk more about, if you're listening to this and you're interested in learning more about how can I take them through like the supplements, that's like the quick and easy, right? And then more of dietary, and then more of like functional, and how do I build a treatment plan. I'm doing a workshop this Saturday morning. So for our community, you get a ticket as a gift from us. So reach out to us if you didn't get the email. We're going to send the email again tomorrow. If you're a guest here in this podcast, then it's instead of $229, it's just $29. We're discounting the ticket, and you can come spend a day with me. We got some amazing tools, and it's a workshop, so we're building together with you. You're building your first treatment plan for a specific condition, and I'm helping you. We're doing it with you. So reach out to us if you're interested in joining us this coming Saturday. So Dr. Esha, take us into the last root cause.
Yeah, let's do it. So the last one that we want to talk about, which is also a really big one, environmental chemicals. We could, I guess, go all day on this one too. Environmental chemicals, our environment plays a huge role in many chronic diseases. I think we all probably know that. We're exposed to thousands, countless of chemical compounds on a daily basis, but particularly in people with eczema, environmental exposures may alter the immune development and shift them from the Th1 and Th2 pathways and throw off the balance there. And so it's theorized that the rise in eczema, atopic dermatitis in industrialized countries may actually be correlated to the amount of chemical exposures that drive a more T helper 2 dominant immune state. So sources of these environmental compounds are going to be things like vehicle emissions, industrial pollutants, pesticides, fertilizers, tobacco smoke, airborne particulates, personal care items, processed foods, right, which have a lot of added ingredients there. Additionally, heavy metals can leach from, your dental amalgams or dental materials, implants, even jewelry. It's really interesting. When you look at when you do hair studies on people, hair mineral analyses, they're not really commonly used in the functional medicine world. Maybe they are actually, but I don't think I use them that much, but I've used them in the past. You can see someone's like jewelry rubbing on their skin in their hair. So you can see high amounts of certain nickel in people's hair. And what happens is people wear nickel jewelry or rings or bracelets, whatever they wear that has nickel in it. It rubs across the skin. And over time, your skin actually your body will filter that in, and it needs some place to put it. So it'll deposit it in the hair. You can see heavy metals in the hair. You can see various things. You can see pollutants, barium in the hair, on the hair. So I would definitely say that there is a huge kind of world of environmental toxins, and everything that touches our skin, our body has to figure out what to do with it. So just think of it that way. Let's take a look at this illustration from a 2015 publication in Toxicological Research. We see these various environmental chemicals associated with triggering atopic dermatitis. So we see here primary air pollutants, right? So some of the compounds in the air. I tell anybody, like if you live in a farming town, factory town, if you live near a highway, and technically near a highway is like within 100 miles in terms of environmental exposure, which is pretty much everybody. If you kind of travel often in airports, all of these things, you're exposing yourself to a lot of environmental compounds. And then also indoor air is an issue too. So you want to make sure your patients are changing out their home air filters, make sure if they want to add air filtering devices. Some people work in like moldy buildings or in facilities and they can't control the air quality. So I tell people, take your own device to work with you. I've had people, I've patients I've seen working in school buildings, and they have a lot of mold exposure and chronic issues because of that, right? So the air is really a huge source of environmental toxins for a lot of people. You have secondary air pollutants, tobacco smoke, ground level ozone, things of that nature. Then you have the actual contact allergens, skin irritants, which are a big issue for eczema, which is a skin condition, right? So the heavy metals, so think about jewelry and things rubbing across the skin, fragrances that we spray on our skin, perfumes, all of those things, even hair products, not necessarily perfumes, but a lot of hair products have perfumes or fragrances in them. You see preservatives that we put on our preservatives in our diet, also preservatives in topical products, and then other food additives, antioxidants, food colorings, and I don't know, I guess antioxidants on there. I have to kind of dig more into that one, but those can also be triggers for eczema patients. And then flavorings, taste enhancers, like what is it called? It's like the big one that they use to enhance MSG. Those types of things also can be associated with some eczema symptoms. So let's just talk about two of them more in detail. So air pollutants. Several epidemiological studies suggest that a number of air pollutants have been considered responsible for the development or exacerbation of eczema and other allergic diseases. So a number of cross-sectional studies revealed an association between exposure to air pollutants and eczema symptoms. In one study, eczema symptoms were significantly associated with benzene, particulate matter, nitric oxide compounds, especially in 9 to 11-year-old children. And then when it comes to food additives, there seems to be a higher prevalence of reactions from food additives in those with eczema compared to the general population. So food additives are pretty much components that are added at any stage of production, processing, packaging, things of that nature, transportation. So artificial dyes, preservatives, stabilizers, like flavor enhancers, like the MSG, artificial sweeteners. So there are a ton of compounds that can impact eczema. And I mean, you can kind of get neurotic about it, I guess, if you really dug deep enough. But I typically tell folks, just make sure their indoor air is of good quality, make sure they're changing out their filters appropriately. There are certain ratings of filters that you want to think about too. Make sure if you want to add an extra device to your home, that's a good idea. I also will just let people know about environmental things. Think about when you wake up in the morning until you go to bed at night, kind of all the things you're putting on your body. Think about how you may be able to swap some of those out for healthier alternatives. So I would say start small and just kind of grow into that with your patients, because it can be really overwhelming at first trying to make a lot of environmental changes at once. So yes, that's that section. Let's do a pop quiz. So how can environmental chemical exposures influence atopic dermatitis? A, by directly causing skin infections. B, by shifting the immune development and altering the Th1, Th2 balance. C, increasing hydration of the skin. Or D, eliminating T cell infiltration. I'll give you guys a few seconds. The answer is B, by shifting immune development and altering the Th1, Th2 balance. So really interesting topic, environmental factors. Dr. Chow, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on things like heavy metal testing, right, in your eczema patients, or just environmental testing. Do you do any of that?
Yes, and in autoimmune patients, right, it's always, I mean, it's complex, right? Because there's so many different triggers that could be involved in that. And, we talked about the gut and the environment and of course their diet. But there's so many things, even within environmental factors, right? There could still be certain groups like heavy metal or maybe endocrine disruptors, or flame retardants. There's it's really all around us. So I feel like the learning functional medicine, let's say better understanding the root cause, it's really helped me to better identify, right? What is it, the one or two things that I want to focus on right now with this patient, right? Because we know the more we give patients, the less likely they're going to do, right? If you give them a list of 5 things, it's a little bit more likely they're going to do. If you give them 2 things, it's much more likely. And if you give them 20, they're probably not going to follow through because, right, it's because it's really hard to change to change your entire life.
Yeah.
Right. And I had a colleague that used to say, it's easier to change someone's religion than to change their diet. Right. So
yeah, put that on a t-shirt. I agree.
So what I learned is really, it's not just to understand the mechanism and understand the treatment strategy. It's really important for us to understand what do we prioritize. Like, and that's what we always kind of teach in our community, right? It's like when you take the evaluation tool that the academy gives you, you give the patient to fill it up. They're going to come back and you're already going to have a pretty much a good overview of which trigger or mechanism or root cause is more likely to be or more important to address. But the more you understand the mechanism, now you have a better understanding of like, okay, let's prioritize environmental factors, let's say, for example, or your gut or cellular dysfunction or whatever it is. And then what is the one thing they should do about it the next 30 days that will tackle they'll give them the best improvement in performance, right? When I talk about performance, it's not in a sports aspect, it's more of like cellular performance or organ performance or system performance, right? It's like, how can we one thing that give them the best resolution for that dysfunction, right? So as you mentioned, really identifying what it is. Do they have maybe symptoms and signs of mold, right? Then they might be also exposed to heavy metals or exposed to this, or maybe they're living in an old house and also have lead, but the mold might be the number one priority. If we tackle that thing, we might get like 60%. I'm just throwing out a number, but might get like 60% improvement, right? And I think that's really important. I learned that over like really years of putting together, not just studying functional medicine, but also seeing my patients. Like I had an autoimmune arthritic patient in their 30s, relatively young patient, and they tried different things and went to different practitioners, and in the end, they came to see us. We sat down together for a couple of sessions, and in the end, I was kind of like, there were just so many symptoms of like something in their house where they're living was just not right. And I asked him, listen, do you have these things? Try to look around the bathroom, around your window, maybe go up to they had like a small attic, pop your head in there with a flashlight, try to see if you see these like spots or this. And I kind of described, I even showed him a couple of pictures. And he came back and he said, I don't know if I seen those, but he said, as soon as I popped my head in the attic for a few minutes, I started feeling like I just got nauseous almost, right? And I was like, okay, well, the nausea probably didn't have anything to do with arthritis, but there could be something there. So we got a mold toxicity, mold testing, and they found that he had high amounts of the spores, right? The mold spores. So that mycotoxins breeding it all the time, right? Yep. That can definitely cause a histamine reaction, cause aggravation of their symptoms. So we addressed that, right? We did a protocol internally, and then we also had to address the house issue, and that was amazing. It was like 3 months later, 90% of his symptoms were like improved.
That's
right?
Impressive. Nice.
So, I could have done some more. I could have continued to do anti-inflammatory, and he would have tried different drugs, and, he didn't want to go on biologics, but we could have tried all sorts of different things. And the end result would be probably we might get some benefit, but he would continue to struggle until we would find this like one thing that kind of drops the dominoes, right?
Right.
So of course we can talk about this for hours because there's so many interesting cases that got really good results with that. But we're limited on time, so we're gonna jump straight into the supplement. So this is when we also want to talk about some either nutritional herbal factor that could be beneficial. So one of the most prominent nutrients that we're looking at in clinical studies is actually vitamin D. And there's mixed results, because that could be possibly because many studies look at some studies look at supplementation, while other studies look at deficiencies, right? And I'm sure you've seen that as well, Dr. Esha, as you can read into vitamin D studies, right? Like some studies show that there's better benefit if the patient is actually deficient, right? And that obviously makes sense, right? But in general, it's a very common finding to see that many patients don't have the optimal level of vitamin D, which is between 50 to 80. And it's interesting to mention that compared with healthy controls, those with eczema of all ages tend to have lower levels of vitamin D. And there's a couple of studies here that we'll post for you if you're interested in reading more. And vitamin D is really important because vitamin D has an immunomodulating effect on our immune system. So, and this is seen, by the way, not just when it comes to eczema, but also with other autoimmune conditions. But here it's very, we're seeing it over and over in several studies that there's deficiency, higher rates of deficiency, and there's also there's some reports that vitamin D supplementation could benefit patients with chronic inflammation. So what are the dosages that we would typically look at? The ranges between 2,000 units to 5,000 units. Of course, it depends on what comes up with the lab testing. But one thing that we've noticed, which was really, really interesting, is that even supplementing patients with 2,000 units, even if they have normal levels of vitamin D, just from clinical experience, sometimes that benefits the patient 2 to 3 months into it, right? So if you're looking for a professional grade supplements, there are different types of supplements out there, but orthomolecular products have a good one, and this is a vitamin D, 1,000 units. So for most patients, we would recommend 2,000 units. Of course, if they're not exposed, they don't get any sun exposure because they work in an office, they don't get enough exposure, or maybe they need some extra support because they're lower on their blood test, then we would typically sometimes go up to 5,000 or even more than that every day for at least 3 months to get that give that nutritional support. In my practice, at least, and this is not, this is just a very general for educational purposes. In my practice, at least, our general treatment for every patient with eczema is 2,000 units of vitamin D at minimum for 6 months. So that's typically what we're going to do. Now, so we talked today about, if you're taking a few things from our conversation today, we talked about the gut and the importance of, again, the balanced microbiome. We also talked about the environmental factors. We talked about the food reactivity, right? And we talked about how there's a difference between food allergy, right, and gluten sensitivity, which is referred to in the research as non-celiac gluten sensitivity. The symptoms are different, signs and symptoms are different, and of course the testing is very different. But it's really important to understand these factors, because when a patient comes to sit in front of you, right, and looking for answers, it's important to understand those mechanisms and the testing, so you're going to be the go-to person that would be the health expert to help them resolve their resolve or get a significant improvement in their health and function. So if you're interested in learning more about supporting your patients with eczema or other autoimmune conditions, log into your course dashboard. This is where you have specific classes on autoimmune conditions and functional gut health and environmental and detoxification. And you got specific conditions on geriatric and neurological. And of course, schedule a coaching call. Our team is here to help you out to build a successful practice, make this profitable, right? As an added income if you choose to, or to replace your source of income right now. And then, of course, the coaching calls are great because it's an opportunity to jump on a virtual call like we're doing right now and share one of your patients who might be struggling and see how functional and integrated medicine can offer solutions that they're just not going to get anywhere else, right? So, and also, as I mentioned, you're invited on Saturday. I'm doing a special workshop. We call it the Functional Medicine Challenge. We're starting Saturday morning. I think it's 8 a.m. Pacific time, 10 a.m. Central time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. This is about a 5 or 6 hour workshop, and we're going to build a functional medicine program for your patients. So we're going to go from how do we get those patients to identifying the root causes, to building the top 2 or 3 supplements, and then top 4 or 5 nutritional and lifestyle strategies. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to put it all together, and we're going to be working together as a workshop, not a class, to build that. I highly recommend to join. And when you're in that community, you get access to all of those workshops with us. And then, of course, if you're a guest here, feel free to join in. It's instead of $229, it's just $29 to spend the day with us, and or half a day, and build your functional medicine program. So, Dr. Asha, I really appreciate you being here and putting this together for us and sharing from your years of clinical experience.
This was great. I really enjoyed this. I feel like we could do maybe a whole year-long deep dive on skin gut axes. So it's nice to try to condense it down, try to condense it into an hour. So
yes, yeah. Absolutely. And there's one question that we wanted to answer before we from one of our members, and they're referring to they're asking what vegetables are considered triggers, and I believe they're referring to that.
The picture. I think it was the tomatoes or the nightshades are kind of in that category. So tomatoes, and then I would just say nightshades in general. The nightshades are basically a family of a plant family, but specifically they have there's this molecule, it's called a glycoalkaloid that you find in them. That's kind of the big trigger issue, and that causes like gut disruption. So interestingly enough, I've seen tomatoes be issues for other like non-eczema patients, like hidradenitis suppurativa patients, these really intense like inflammatory skin conditions. I don't know what it is about the tomato specifically compared to some of the other vegetables. I think it's the glycoalkaloids in there, but the nightshade vegetables would be considered triggers.
Yes. Yeah, and it's very rare, and something that I'll mention, I have seen patients that when we removed nightshades, it made a big difference. And I've seen many patients that it did nothing.
Right.
So when I kind of looked into the more I studied nutrition and looked at the research, I understood that there's really a lack of research in the field. But there's multiple groups that are important to know of, right? So you mentioned nightshades. There's also lectin-rich vegetables like lentil, peas, beans. There's also oxalate. Some people respond to oxalates. And there's some vegetables that contain histamine or can stimulate histamine release. Yeah. But it's that's a good question. Which vegetables can cause issues? I always say the best method is to test, and there are specific tests that can actually measure immune reactivity, not necessarily antibodies. But in this particular case, eczema in that study showed was tomatoes, right? So ask your patients to remove tomatoes, right? If there's improvement, tomatoes, dairy, sugar, and wheat, right? If there's improvement, then great, right? Now we can start narrowing it down. We can introduce tomatoes for a couple of weeks. Are things getting worse? It's probably tomatoes, right? So through a simple elimination diet, you can help patients just understand. The more you understand nutritional medicine, the better practitioner you become. And you can also save your patients a lot of agony and suffering and money, because you're finally going to provide them with solutions.
Yeah.
So good question. Thank you for putting it in and stimulating this conversation. And so thank you again, Dr. Esha.
Thank you.
And thank you for our media team and Jacob for putting this all together for us, allowing us to be with you wherever you are. And of course, I want to thank each one of you for being here, for listening, tuning in, growing, developing your skills, and being there every day to help your community members. So I really appreciate it. I hope you take care of yourself in the meantime. Have a good evening. And I'll see you on Saturday on the live workshop, which will be a lot of fun. So take care for now, and we'll see you on Saturday. Bye-bye.
Bye.